But tonight we're delighted and honored to be able to welcome Josh Mabe from Chicago. Josh is a filmmaker, librarian, and actually one of my favorite programmers in Chicago or anywhere else. So I'm particularly excited for tonight's screening. Previously he programmed Onion City Experimental Film Video Festival in Chicago. He also was the programmer for Chicago Filmmakers, and currently he runs Channels, a screening series in Chicago with Aaron Nixon. So please join me in welcoming Josh Mabe.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Adam, Madison, and Mary for having me in the LA Film Forum. I'll briefly describe, I won't go into the whole story, I'll go into the whole story Sunday, but this just to preview the stuff I'm showing on Sunday. When I was working as program director of Chicago Filmmakers, there was just piles and piles of old 16mm film in the back room that had been untouched since probably the late 70s. And I just went through and I was watching a lot of them. Some were good, some were not good. And a lot of them had these labels for an old film co-op called the Center Cinema Co-op. So I made a program out of those that was a lot more lasciviously oriented at the time. It was called Hippies Doing Things Nude, and it focused more on the sort of like new, the more fun aspects of the program. But that program came and went. I didn't think anything of it. And then years later, I found one of the filmmakers. The sort of the core of that screening were these 3 films made by 2 filmmakers named Bauman Lowe. And I had no idea about them. All my researching just turned up a few campus newspapers in the late 60s, early 70s with references to their screenings, but no other information. So I, just by accident, last year, I found Thomas Baum. And he told me the whole story of their making, and it led me down the path of going to the Chicago History Museum and looking through the old co-op records and really doing a deep dive on Bauman Lowe and the co-op and just the history around it. Ended up being connected to Second City and its founding and the Gene Siskel Film Center and its dissolution, and it was just this sort of weird connective tissue of Chicago film culture. So that program from the Center Cinema Co-op is on Sunday, so come check that out. And my films, which are a lot less interesting. I went to film school at the University of South Carolina, where they mostly teach you to like be news cameramen and work for global ETV programming. But I always had an interest in experimental film from the time I was a teen. And so I just started making films and Super 8 stuff when I was a teenager, and by the time around 2010, I finished my first thing that I thought was good enough to give a name. And it was this unwieldy, hour-long 16mm film that has since been cut down several times. But after that, I got exhausted of making this big, giant, hour-long 16mm film, and I just started like coming up with a bunch of little tiny films. Immediately after that, I just was like, okay, this one's 45 seconds, this one's a minute. It was a lot of leftover footage from the hour-long project. It was a lot of new stuff. It was just a mixture. But as I started making these shorter films, it got me more excited in what I was doing. It was less, obviously it was less labor-intensive, but it was also more, since it was less thematically tied to one thing, it was more pleasurable, and I felt more active doing it. I learned that these sort of smaller, tighter, more powerful films were what I was more interested in. So this program is a lot of those sort of odd, mysterious, magical films that are short and tiny, and in a long program of these artists, these films might get overlooked. Fred Camper has a term for them that he coined around Stan Brackage's films, like ghost films. Like the films, if you're watching 75 minutes of Stan Brakhage films, this 3-minute little thing that was in the middle of the program, you're not even gonna be able to pull an image from it. But those are the ones that have always stuck with me. And like, just to finish the Brakhage analogy, like Wold Shadow by Brakhage, it's like this 3-minute thing. It's my favorite film of his, and Fred thinks I'm an idiot for ranking it as my favorite Brakhage. So those sort of small, what this program is those small, mysterious ghost films of sort. Except for Adam Parody's film, which is probably his most. It's pretty concussive, but that's where I feel all my filmmaking is now these days, is making these sort of small, mysterious, magical ghosts, and I hope you guys enjoy them. Thank you for coming. Oh, and just a little historic note. Yeah, the first two films, everyone in this program I know, I'm friends with, they're colleagues and friends. The first two films, Edward Owens and Joanne Alam, they're two people who have a lot of connections to Chicago. Joanne Alam, she passed away, and when she passed away, I'd never met her, but I was like, because I was a librarian and an archivist, I was tasked with going to her attic and like digging through her films and being the first person to put hands on them, and obviously I had no... her husband was very nice to have us in there to look around, but I just had them go to the Chicago Film Archive. So I don't have a personal connection to her work, but since then, a lot of her films have been restored and sort of curated by the Chicago Film Archive. So they've done a lot of great work with Joanne's work, and check it all out. A lot of it is on the Chicago Film Archive website, but they're really great films. And this film, also the male voiceover on the program is a guy named Chuck Kleinhans, who was really important to the Chicago film community, really super supportive of me, so it's, you know, got some personal connections there, but Chuck was a great guy. And then Edward Owens was always a filmmaker whose films were like really exciting sounding to me, but really hard to see. When you contacted Filmmakers Cooperative about them, they'd be like, these are original prints, how about you don't rent them? Or, you know, putting very restrictive things on seeing them. But thankfully, they've made some good 4K scans of the films, and so they're getting seen a lot more now, and they're all phenomenal. And this again, short, small, mysterious one of his collection is probably my favorite. So anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.